I call the meeting of the Bennington-Rutland Supervisory Union Board to order at 6:31 p.m. And our first item is actually communications with parents, citizens, staff. So if anybody has any comments, questions, etc., now's a great time. We have a few public on. Does anybody want to speak at this point, or wait until later? We can make room for it later as well. Okay. Hearing nothing, we'll move on to the reviewing the norms, which we typically do every meeting, and ask the vice chair, Mr. Chandler, to read our board norms.
I knew Dick would be jealous.
I'm not jealous. I'm excited.
PRSU board norms. We will start and end on time, maximum of 2 hours. Be prepared for agenda items. The agenda will prioritize the most important issues. We will have time limits on agenda items. All members will have an opportunity to speak if they so choose. We will listen to who is speaking and focus on the issue at hand. And finally, we will not micromanage the superintendent.
Great. Thank you, David. So now we have
The
we're on to
consent.
Dick never lets us get the question out first here. We've
You
yes,
can rule
we
out of order.
have
Go
a
ahead.
consent agenda. So Mr. Dale.
I move the consent agenda.
Second,
Okay, a second from David Chandler. It's the minutes of December 7th and a hiring decision. Does anybody have any issue with us just approving it as the consent agenda? Hearing none, then all in favor of approving the consent agenda, please raise your hand. And Dean? Is Dean raising his hand?
My hand's up. My hand's up.
Okay, good.
My mic was muted, but my hand is up.
Okay. All those, anyone opposed? I think that was everybody. And abstentions? So that looks unanimous. Good. Okay, governance process. Now,
I did have one
please.
question, if I could ask Randy, and that was if it's appropriate, just for a little clarification on the hiring. It said somewhere that it was a temporary, it was a temporary hiring.
No, this is a permanent hire for our food service director. Kelly Foster resigned from her position. She's moving on to kind of next steps for herself. And so we posted the food service director position, and I was really pleased with our applicant pool. And Stephanie is a great hire. We have a transition plan in place for the transition between them that I feel also very positively about. So they'll be working together the last 2 weeks of January part-time, and Stephanie will begin full-time with us on February 1st. So those 9 days, I think, will be a good crossover time for Stephanie to get up to speed with our organization.
May I make a motion?
Should we as a board, okay, I think Dick's going to make the motion I was going to ask, which was, should we as a board?
May I make
her-
a motion to formally thank Kelly for her incredibly wonderful and great job, and wish her extraordinary success as she moves forward.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, there are lots of seconds.
Yeah.
Everybody's seconding.
Yes, well said.
We'll give it to Deb Linus. Okay.
Oh, no, I was going to say the same thing. And as someone who ate lunch once a week at Floodbrook School for several years, her cooking is amazing and she's just charming. You know, everybody loved her.
Kelly's a big loss, and I will make sure to have her watch this video, the first 5 minutes of this video, to hear that. So well said, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that is, thank you for making that motion, Dick, and you just beat David to it, but she has been a wonderful asset, but Stephanie looks like that's quite the impressive background, and looks like a great hire. So pleased to see that. Okay, today we get to the meat of today, which is the fiscal 22 budget, the general budget, and the special ed budget. The goal tonight is, even though we've seen the general budget, this is the second time, special ed budget just the first time, but our goal is to approve the budgets, so we'll be in a good position to help the districts with their budgets. Mr. Dale.
Do we actually, because it's the BRSU budget and they're each separate but wholly integrated, do we need to actually approve separately each budget?
We could probably do them together. I don't know if anybody has any issue with that, but I think but alternatively, it doesn't take much more time if we run through the general first, give Sue the floor to run through the general first, then we can have discussions. Could take a motion at that point and then get into the SPED one, either way.
Mm-hmm.
But passing it over to Sue.
Hey, hello, everybody. All right, so you've seen the general budget once already, as Jim mentioned, and we just have a couple changes in there for you. To start with, we had shown you in the last draft the inclusion of an assistant superintendent position at full-time. And we've changed that up a little bit. We've removed the assistant superintendent position, and instead we've included an MTSS/equity coordinator position. And I think title to be sort of tweaked as we move forward with what that position will look like, but that's what we're calling it today. And that position would pick up a lot of the responsibilities that I think we were originally considering for the assistant superintendent, along with some other professional development and items that could be in support of what we're working towards under the Consolidated Federal Program, which is why we're splitting this position 40-60 between the local budget and the grant, the Consolidated Federal Program grant, or our normal Title I, Title II, Title IV grant. So this won't be fully funded out of the general fund because we believe we'll be able to fund the majority of it through CFP, but a portion of it is included in the general budget. So overall, since we had a 0.6 FTE assistant superintendent in the budget for this year, and there'll be a 0.4 for this position in next year, it's an overall 0.2 administrator FTE reduction. Okay. So that's the first.
Is that grant beyond 1 year, or is this?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's our annual grant. So we get Title I, II, and IV money every year. And I don't want to say it's stable, but it's fairly stable. It will fluctuate a little bit, but it's a sizable grant. It's in the budget. You'll see it when we can move a little further into the pages. And where we are in that grant, going to be eliminating one intervention position to free up some money, so that we can take care of funding some of this position. And before I move on to talk about any further numbers, I don't know, Randy, if you want to jump in a little bit to this conversation to talk about your thinking here.
Right. This is a change from last month, and I think that it was important for me to take the time to really look at our long-term planning and the direction we're going and what's happening, and to spend a little bit more time with that. I kept hearing the phrase in my head over and over again. We fund what we prioritize and value, and it brought me back through some conversations with Paul and Skylar, brought me back to work and planning that I had done last February and March, pre-COVID, about the direction that we were going to be going as an organization. And in going back and looking at the work to be done, I felt like what I needed to prioritize as we look ahead right now are two things, and how might I do that differently than what I had originally proposed to you. So one of those was recognizing that we've got work to do with implementation of MTSS practices within our system. We're required to, and I don't feel as if our systems are as robust and comprehensive as they can and should be. And the way the assistant superintendent position was outlined was sort of one step higher, sort of in a administrative structure than I felt was going to be able to give the attention to this that I wanted. So that was concerning to me. And I felt like what we really needed was a position for a couple of years. I don't want this position to be a long-term addition to our system at this point. I want there to be a clear, focused, target, timed expectation for work to be completed within the next 2 years that everyone in our system knows and understands. And so that was a driving force. As important was the voice that I have heard from you and Taconic and Green in particular of succession. And how do we make sure that we have a solid succession plan? And so that meant going back to Skylar and Paul and saying, all right, if we are going to restructure things, then we need to restructure the work that the three of us do so that if for whatever reason something were to happen, we've got an organizational structure in place that can absorb the work that would need to be done if I were not here. And we did. We rehashed all of the work. We assigned things differently. We went back and forth. I made a presentation. They went and talked about it, came back to me and said, yeah, we support the plan you put in place. So all of that work kind of has happened since our last meeting. And I'll tell you, I feel really good about it. I think it's the right thing. More people connecting with our buildings, focusing more directly on teaching and learning, I think is the right thing for our system right now.
Okay, so that's the biggest shift in the budget numbers outside of me finalizing health insurance up to the point that I could as of last week. It's still open enrollment through the end of January, but I don't really expect a lot more changes to come. I think the majority of our staff have taken the time to review their health insurance options, and we had a few sort of last minute anxious changes today because this was the last day to get updates for January 1. And I'm sure we'll have a couple of stragglers through the month of January, but not a lot. So I don't expect there to be much more of an impact to any of the budgets, certainly not the BRSU budgets. So that being said, we have a 7.8% increase in assessed expenditures. So that's the $169,000. And that about half of that is due to moving the HHP position from TNG into BRSU, which we talked about last month. We've talked about the additional software supports that we've added to the budget. And the balance of this is just the salary and benefit increases and the general tweaking to costs, whether it be up or down on line items where we can or where we need to. So you had asked, I think the last time around, what the impact of moving that HHB position out of TNG into BRSU will be to Medowee and TNG, and that's $11,000 approximately, assessment wise. So TNG is going to make out by $11,000 and Medowee will pay their share of that position by about $11,000. The only other thing I want to mention is the large amount of the surplus that we're returning to the districts. This is a bigger number than we would typically return. So right now, I'm showing $145,000. And if you look at packet page 8, that's our fund balance page. All right. So we've got on line 29 of packet page 8, a actual fund balance at the end of last year of $197,000. So we had set aside 50 to use to return a return of surplus for this budget year for FY21 already. So approximately 145 would be the balance of that. And so I'm suggesting we use 145, return that to the districts. And specifically just because of what we're seeing in all of the districts, right? Because we've got a decrease to the yield, which is increasing our tax rates across the board, 3+ cents, depending on which district you're in. And I think we have to return some of these funds to the districts, sort of help them out with the tax rate, knowing full well that what does that mean the following year? We all know what that means the following year, right? That's going to bump things up because this money is still going to be in the budget unless we make cuts of some kind. So hopefully we will have some surplus to return the following year as well, but it's unlikely to be as sizable as what we're returning this year. And so that it is a decision we're making to give more money back this year. You'll see this on the special ed budget as well, than we would typically in any one year. But on the other side of that, we also are seeing larger surpluses than we would typically see. And we know that a lot of that is due to COVID. So it makes sense that we would return more money this year, given that we have raised money in last year's budget and this year, and probably aren't going to have to spend as much this year, just like last year, because of reduction in operation costs. So that's a quick summary. Does anybody have any specific questions about the detail?
Just kind of throwing my 2 cents on, personally, it's always a concern when you're using surplus and the impact on the following year. But at the same time, as you say, the way the anticipated is just anticipated. It's unknown at this point. But, the way things are going, it just, we're facing this in the special ed budget, obviously, as well. And it just makes all the sense in the world to me to bump that amount in the way you're proposing. So, I had one little sort of question. I was thinking, and people can suss it out, but in the TNG meeting also, we were talking about, presentation and making things more transparent. And to some extent, I was thinking on the fund balance page, breaking out a line for what the, previous year's surplus used or deficit raised was, might be make it a little clearer for people if we actually had a separate line for surplus deficit. Yeah.
Sure, I can change the way that's presented.
Do people, anybody else kind of think that's a good idea or know what I'm talking about? Or Dick?
I do.
Do you think that would be clear?
I'm not understanding exactly.
Michael? Yeah.
No, I'm not understanding exactly what the breakout would be indicating.
Okay.
This would be
Well, essentially,
like at line 29.
well, let me try with my, layman's, basically right now we show, you had a prior year fund balance at year end, and then we have, you've got things like, transfers to specific funds and all, but, mainly revenues and expenditures for the following year. One of those revenue items is if we used a surplus from a prior year, that's actually a revenue item. So you could break that out of the revenue figure and show, an additional line. Am I saying it right, Sue?
Yeah, what it would look like is if you look at line, for example, line 31, which is this year's anticipated revenues. What I would do is if you go to package page 7 and you look at where that number comes from, it comes from the subtotal line 21. It is this year's anticipated revenues. I would be sort of adding in a $50,000 revenue line that we used from the surplus as another line item on top of that anticipated revenue for FY21 to sort of show that money coming in. I would have to just change the presentation to package page 7 to include that surplus in the total, just so that we're not double counting anything.
Right. I'm just, thinking that, somehow that would also let people on, right now on the fund balance page, it's hard to follow what's going on year to year. And here you'd see the,
you could see the in and the out,
45, et cetera. Yeah.
Yep, I can definitely do that.
But it also could be included in the rhetoric that is presented to all three boards going forward with respect to how we're breaking out both this budget and also the special ed budget. The fact is we're using and probably going to in all 5 of the potential budgets. Voters don't vote on the BRSU or special ed.
Right.
But it's important that everybody understand that we have taken a hard look at circumstance. And if that's as a part of frequently asked questions in that formal presentation that Meadowy and obviously all the rest of us are going to present, then at least the voters will understand that we're being terribly responsible and responsive to the potential real hurt out in our communities, and that this carries with it a cost, and the cost is we won't have as big a surplus next year.
Jane?
Yeah, I think that what both Jim and Dick have said, I support as well. The one thing I was also going to add with what Dick said is I think sometimes, although I know that this is the official report, perhaps in the rhetoric, even just being able to make it as a footnote or separate it out, like you said, in the rhetoric, or a footnote at the very bottom for those things that are really important, because like what you said, it really, I think, cuts down on people questioning, again, where are we at? Where did you get that number? I personally sometimes feel like when it is in all those numbers, I think people tend to get lost. And so I can appreciate if maybe for formal purposes like this, maybe the report has to be all the numbers. But like what Dick is saying, I think when it comes to using it in these other meetings, maybe making it to where it's a footnote, bolden those items so that it's easy for people to go back and forth, in referencing those pages.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we do is we do an FAQ, so that basically trying to come up with what are the questions the taxpayers are going to have about this budget. And it's similar to what I'm sharing with you guys. We want to tell the story about what we've included in the numbers, but also want to point out the more important facts that we want to draw their attention to and answer questions that we think they might have. And in doing that, we're going to reference, what we usually do is we reference those line item numbers so that it can take them to the right page, right line item, so that they can actually be drawn right to that place. So we would definitely do that with surplus, the use of surplus. And the other thing that you'll see when you look at your district level budgets is, based on what we talked about at the last meeting, we've made this use of surplus its own line item. So you'll see it not only on the summary page of the budgets for both BRSU and special ed, but you'll also see it in the body. So as you said, I think at the last meeting, Dick, that it is important to point it out right on the summary page, because some people don't go any further, right? That's what they're looking at, that snapshot picture. So we've put it on there, and you guys can, when we talk about your local budgets, then we can decide if you like that presentation as well.
Deb?
I can't remember if you included it already in the FAQs, but the trade-off, the idea that we use the money now and what implications that may have for next year, sort of sets us up for next year.
Yeah.
Because it is a big trade-off and it is a big risk, but it makes sense to do that now, and that's looking forward.
Yeah, I kind of think it's important to to share even what are the tax implications, or what are the estimated tax implications for you this year in returning this surplus. So therefore, what might that mean in an increase in taxes next year, right?
Right, and that we don't know. We're taking our best guess, but could go either way.
But I think we've, the FAQs have been fabulous, and like our district level annual reports. I think we also took a look back, so I think I'm right. We have the BRSU general and special ed budgets with FAQs on those as well in the package. So, I think transparency wise, we have been, spectacular, thanks to our great resources in this area. So,
and Bob.
What's that?
Bob's help.
Yeah, Bob's help too, but Sue is, having attended some statewide some VSBA things on how to prepare finances and present them. I was really pretty depressed when I went to that, saying, boy, what they're presenting isn't nearly as good as what we do.
Yeah, also suggest that the change in the organizational structure at the BRSU needs to make that point about succession, appropriate flexibility of organization, and so that people don't suddenly focus, because they can get wrapped up in, well, if it's a 0.2 and you're basically looking long term and you're going to need a superintendent, why don't you just do it now? So I think that the rationale, Randy, that you provided also needs to be a part of this document. And the fact is, you think that it will have, over the next 2 years, a substantial impact in the way education is delivered to all of our students. Because as soon as you say that, and a positive impact at that, then it becomes much harder to say, well, cut $25,000 out of the budget and we're good to go.
Right. It's that, I think that's a really good point, that kind of having a comment about, you know, how we make decisions on staffing and how we're staffed and looking to the future. That could be a very valuable. By the way, I wanted to make sure, did everybody get Celeste sent out before the meeting, the list of, you know, this I have found incredibly useful in trying to understand all the moving pieces of personnel throughout our organization. Because it gets a little confusing and it's a little tough when you're just looking at one entity.
Yep.
To understand. So it's, you know.
Do we need to include that document, or is that really getting too far into the weeds and actually potentially compromising private stuff?
I would think it's a little bit into the weeds, but having it available to answer questions and all, but that's just my gut.
I mean, the summary page itself, not like, so what you guys got is the summary, and then you also have the detail, which breaks it out between BRSU funding sources and TNG and Medowee, right? So you have everything. But realistically, that summary page is no different than the payroll summary page that I provide you when I do your local budgets and in the BRSU budgets as well. So, I mean, I think it would be fine to include, and I think
the first
yeah,
2 pages.
Just that top page, right? The top 2 pages. I think
Right.
that
Because those comments are great, and
right, it gives you the whole picture. And I think I want to say last year when we did the annual report for TNG, if I remember correctly, we didn't include the payroll summary because I don't usually in the annual reports, and I think TNG decided they wanted it. So I think we were going to do that for all of the districts anyway. So I don't think it could hurt anything to include it. It's a lot of numbers. Most people, it's going to be too much to look at. But for someone who's interested, it can't hurt.
Yeah, again, for transparent, I like us being as transparent as possible. It's a good point. Do other people have any strong feelings on including that or not? The dog does. Okay. Okay, great. All right, Sue, did you have more to say on the general?
I had one other thing I wanted to mention that, so I had mentioned that the assessed expenditures are going up 7.8%, but of course the budget itself, the overall budget, because we include grant funding in what you're looking at, that's a 9.6 increase. So we'll explain that as well. The reason for that big difference is because of ESSER, right? We've added a whole nother like $400,000 into the budget because we are getting a new grant that is not necessarily going to continue. Who knows? But for now, that's a sizable increase, and we'll also produce some, at least three new positions, which is great.
Can we define Esther in the document?
Oh yeah, we'll do that.
But
that then does raise the question of, we've got the additional positions funded by ESSER. We've got the 2 positions funded by ESSER, and that is not necessarily a long-term funding source.
Right. And they're not long.
What is our plan?
Those are not long-term positions either.
Right.
So we again, thinking about the needs of our system, an additional nurse because we of the the additional medical needs that we have right now and anticipate continuing for a period of time, the executive functioning coach, and the social worker, which we're adding to help us with the transition back to school next year that we've talked about for the last few months, the social, emotional, and mental health, getting back to school needs. So we are intentionally funding with that money positions that we feel are going to facilitate educational programming and school operations as we transition back to more sort of typical non-COVID practices. So we're being pretty upfront about that. It's intended to serve a purpose with the money, and the purpose that money is intended to be used for, without an expectation that will continue long term. So that is, I think you're absolutely right, that is an important point to explain to people, because otherwise it does raise a whole lot of other questions and could be concerning to people that, well, you're grant funding it now, but you may turn around and tell us you want to include these long term in the local budget, and then what? But that is not our intention. We are using it as it's intended, and we hope that it addresses some of the concerns that we've already talked about in previous meetings.
Other people have questions, or?
I have a quick question, two questions actually. So looking at the assessment on the hazing, harassment, bullying, restorative justice section that was in Sue's summary, it looks like you've got two salaries. Is that correct? The first one is the hazing, harassment, bullying, restorative justice coordinator. So that's basically a salary or benefits and salary. And then at the bottom, it says salary, benefits, and other. So is it two positions? Is it the main person plus a
No.
person?
So this is that little summary that you're looking at, David, is just sort of the breakout of what makes up the 169,000 of the increased expenditures. So a big chunk of it is that one position. Right. And that bottom line number, salaries, benefits, others, is basically everything else that has changed in the budget. So, my salary increase, health insurance increases, any other line items that are in there, all that stuff sort of lumped together. And obviously there are some things that are going down and some things that are going up. People have changes in elections, all sorts of things happening. So that's just sort of the balance.
Okay, thank you. And my second question had to do with the person who's now coming in as the equity and MTSS equity coordinator position. Is that also a short-term position, or is that a position that could be turned into a long-term position?
So my goal would be that it is not a long-term permanent position. I'm basing this on my previous experience in leading some significant system-wide change. Putting a position like this in place for a short period of time with a very transparent, clear expectation and goal for what's going to be accomplished, I think we will have a much faster change process given the attention and support. And when people know that it's not going to be there anymore, it can help move things along. So my hope is that we're looking at 2 years with a very concentrated, specific purpose related to our multi-tiered system of support, PBIS work. Equity, I expect to continue, but the equity work can continue in outside of this position. It's just a good partner with it right now.
So then so a question would be, if that turns into a 2-year position, then is your longer term plan that after those 2 years, then we probably would be back to looking at an assistant superintendent position?
I don't know.
Okay, that's a fair answer.
And I was also thinking that was a great way to bring in bandwidth for to join your senior management team. And if this person is able to manage this transition in 2 years without being hated completely, then he or she might deserve to be an assistant superintendent and part of the program. So it's a great I thought it was a very interesting structure and with a lot of dimension to it. So I applaud you guys for coming up with it.
Thank you.
Michael?
I have just a quick question regarding, I was a little confused. Let me see if I couldn't find this again. I know it was in somewhere in that summary, but will be a decrease to the T&G budget for this hazing, harassment, bullying position and an increase to the Meadowy budget. And I wasn't quite, is that like a complete transfer of that debt, or is it something that is shared? I was confused by that.
Yeah, it's something that's shared, so it's part of the assessment. So what happens is that position is no longer in the T&G budget. So T&G locally saves that $82,000. And then we put it in the BRSU budget and our budget goes up by 82. And then T&G and Meadowy share that 82,000 based on your ADM allocation. And so the net impact to both of you is a positive for T&G and a negative for Meadowy, because you have to pay that share now, whereas you never had to pay for it before.
Okay, I understand,
For
but it's
BRSU, it's a wash because we take on the expense but charge it back. So
understood. I get it now. Thank you.
now, I had a question. You mentioned with respect to the MTSS position that you had reduced an instructional intervention, which I'd noticed a position. And is that what's the thought on that position as to we don't need it now, but we will in the future, or what's the thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, it is the way that the CFP, that our title funds are supposed to be driven by what our needs are and what our goals are and the areas of focus for our system and areas of growth. So, it's so interesting because for me, everything is so interconnected. You're the BRSU board and we're talking about the BRSU budget, but the Taconic and Green board and the Meadowy boards have received my superintendent report where we're talking about, and which means all of you have seen it or will see it in Meadowy, but talking about having a leadership team, right? That really looks at what are our system-wide needs and goals, and what's our data showing, and what are our priorities, and what are our priorities, and that will intersect with your ends policies and the work that you're doing, as well as our planning, our educational planning. And so our positions that are funded through the CFP are intended to support those goal areas. And in analyzing sort of some of our current data, we would be shifting, which is what we would expect to be happening. That is something that you as a board should expect, is to see that our positions funded by the CFP reflect our priority areas, instructional and growth areas as a system. There's a really strong through line for that. And so this shift is the challenge. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt myself. The challenge is the timing of all of this, because we don't actually start planning for the CFP till next year, but we have to budget now. So it means there's a little bit of anticipation and future thinking of me, even if we haven't talked about it based on the data we have. So the decision is being made based on the direction that I anticipate us going, based on kind of data that we've got right now and growth and success that we've had in the past in response to what we've already had in place. So you should expect to hear over time, you'll see this with me as in my leadership style, that you will hear me talk about what we're using our CFP Title I, Title IV funds to support, and they should reflect the goal areas that we have as a system in our schools.
Would it be appropriate at this time to make a motion to accept and approve and adopt the budget as presented?
I had one more question, but I can roll that over into the next session. So sure. Okay,
So
Jack has made a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll
Okay,
second.
give that to Corey Rail. Okay. Saw her hand first.
No
All
problem.
right, so if there's no further discussion, then we'll take a vote, and Dean, you can speak up, and the rest of you can raise your hands to vote to approve the BRSU general budget.
Vote to approve.
Okay, I'm seeing
Adopt
everybody
and
there.
approve.
Pardon?
The motion was accept, adopt, and approve.
Okay. Okay, adopt and approve.
I vote yay.
Okay, so I think that was everybody, but I'll ask anyway. Any nays? Or any abstentions? Wouldn't think so. Okay, so that we have adopted and approved the general budget. So time to move on to the special ed budget.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. So for SPED, first time you're seeing it, I know SPED's a big budget. In my summary, you're seeing much of the same sort of conversations that we've been having all along at all of our budget meetings. So FY20, we had a expected surplus of 250. We ended up with a surplus of 614. Much of that is, or some of that, I should say, is due to operations, school dismissal in March. But in special ed, we also have that added factor of kids who exit. And some kids, as we know, cost more than other kids. And we did have some kids exit the district where there were sizable costs in the budget, and we no longer have to spend that money. So that's a large favorable variance, but it's twofold, right? It's COVID plus it's also kids who left and we didn't have to pay for their costs anymore. So we anticipate that surplus of 614 going up to 838. And again, a lot of that is going to be due to our operational costs going down to kids who are getting their education remotely, which will reduce their costs for special education because they're not receiving the certain level of services that they might have received if they were in school. So we're seeing our costs go down for those reasons. And additionally, that we have a sizable number of unfilled positions, right? So we have staff that we budgeted for that we hope to fill those positions for next year, but we weren't able to fill them this year. So we've saved some money there as well. Of course, with special ed, when we save money, we also lose revenue. And a lot of these costs have to do with if, for example, a student who has sizable costs related to them is going to be an extraordinary student, right? Anything over 60,000 is extraordinary. And we get 90% reimbursement for that from the state. So even though we have a large decline in expenditures, we also have a large decline in revenues. So the net of that still will bring up our surplus a little bit. We can't know for sure if that's going to be our true surplus. We can't gauge it as good as we might be able to gauge something like the BRSU general budget, specifically because we have kids in our system because of choice that we're paying for on a kid-by-kid basis. We're not necessarily providing those special ed services. Excuse me, we're paying an independent school or another public school for the services that student is receiving. So as those kids enter and exit, our costs are constantly changing. So let's talk about staffing a little bit. The changes that are in the special education budget for staffing. Now I'm going to run through these and then I'll let Paul jump in to sort of answer your questions with respect to programming changes that are being made. Okay. So we are increasing one special educator. And that is going to happen in one school. At that same school, we're going to be reducing 2 special ed paraeducators. So it's just about a wash, but again, as we always run into, not in the same budget, right? Because the special educator is in the BRSU special ed budget and the paraeducators are in the TNG budget, okay? We are decreasing 1 paraeducator in the anchor program, and that's our program that's located at MEMS. We'll be increasing 2 paraeducators, so a shift of 1 and then an increase of 1 to the RISE program that's located at the Dorset School. We've talked about sort of those shifts in administration. And so along with that change in the assistant superintendent that we were talking about at the BRSU budget, because that position was formerly assistant superintendent / student services coordinator or director of student services, Randy, right? That's what it was. It was 50-50 or 60-40, that position. So now the director of student services has gone from a 0.6, which is what it was in the former budget, up to a 0.4 up to a 1.0. So that's a full 1.0 position. So it's an increase of a 0.6. Along with that, we've decreased a 1.0 student service coordinator. So overall, it's a net savings of an administrative position in the special education budget. And the last little piece that we've done in the special ed budget for staffing is we are adding a 1.0 FTE. It's a whole position. It's an administrative staff position. We have been sort of short-staffed on special ed administrative support for, I don't know, many years, that we haven't had enough administrative support to support all of our administrators in special education. And the main reason for that is the time is pulled away to support Medicaid and handle all the Medicaid claims paperwork. It takes a lot of time. So we've added a whole 1.0, and that position is going to be shared. About 80% of it will be covered by Medicaid funds, and we expect about 20% of it to be covered by the special ed budget. So we're shifting around how the FTEs were spread out before, for who's doing Medicaid, who's doing general administrative work, who's doing special ed administrative work. But the bottom line is we're going to be adding one whole new person to the office, and then we'll be spreading out who's doing what, with 80% of that being grant funded. That was a lot, I know. So
that was a lot for me, Sue.
Does it mean that despite the increase in personnel, that we are better organized to deliver services more effectively and efficiently?
I'm going to let Paul answer that question.
Are you specifically talking about office personnel, or are you talking just across the SU?
When you get to the whole special ed sort of stuff, changing organizational structure in order to solve what for several years you've been kind of accommodating, usually results, or should result, in a substantial benefit to the people being served, in this case, the special ed kids and the staff associated with the responsibility of educating them.
Yeah, Dick, by the way, hello everybody, I'm Paul Eaton. I don't know if I've ever had the pleasure to meet you, but that's always the goal, right? Put the kids at the center of the conversation when we're talking about special education. I think Randy said it, we fund things that are a priority and a value to us. And I think what we end up doing with all these shifts, and mainly the shift to RISE, is that we sort of maximize potential in our other buildings, while at the same time we maximize potential in our other buildings, in the BRSU, while at the same time maximizing programming for kids. So I look at it as a win-win. I'm happy to talk about RISE and why why we're expanding it, if that's something you're interested in. But it makes good sense. The program was super well received. We have strong professionals in there. Kids' goal progress is improving over when they were being served in our buildings because of the nature of the expertise that resides in RISE for us. And at the same time, buildings that were, using 2 para-educators to support 1 student, or using a lot of speech and language time to support a student's assistive technology communication, device time, those costs, or that labor essentially is just moved to RISE, where they can do it just more efficiently and better. Just that's the fact. And then what you have in your school is, in your individual schools, is a better scenario all the way around for serving kids.
It's what my point is, that again, as we are trying to be transparent, a large number of people say, well, you've for years been able to get by and do a fairly effective job And so why do you need another person? And the answer is because we're going to deliver better, more effective service to kids. And we've been limping along for too many years. It's time to bite the bullet.
Yeah, I mean, we have an extra person in one spot, but we have, I mean, if you consider it administratively, we are running with less. So I think that's a good point to make too, as well, to the public. But Dick, that's the goal all the time, is to deliver better service for kids, but also to be fiscally responsible. The pre-K director position, we chose not to fill that because I felt like that's something that I could usurp and I could take on. And so I think that's a good point when we talk to the public about how we are stretching our abilities to do more in light of wanting to do better for kids. We want to do better for kids, but we have to make sure that the public is treated fairly as well.
I would just add that I think in with respect to specifically what Sue was talking about the administrative assistant staff addition, that what we have found was that our student service coordinators were doing a lot of work that really could be done by an administrative assistant. So we had leaders who were spending a really significant amount of their time doing tasks that could be done by an administrative assistant, which pulled them away from their ability to lead their teachers and supervise and support their teachers in doing the work with kids. So by making the decision we made to not fill the student service coordinator, hire an administrative assistant, the intention of that was to make sure that people's expertise were where they needed to be within our buildings to support learning. So I guess I'll just kind of jump on that particular decision in light of that question, because I think
no, that's okay. I'm sorry, Dick. I didn't understand that you were sort of talking specifically about the admin assistant position.
I'm talking about the whole,
yeah,
Okay.
the net.
Yeah.
And I think we have, we're, by using our resources more efficiently and using the right resources in the right place, we have an improvement. But I think, also have just the fundamental decision of when the decision was made to start RISE. I mean, that was a decision, that was centered on providing better service to kids in a more efficient manner. They, kind of come together. I think that's kind of what you're saying here is you're looking at to have better outcomes with fewer resources in total.
Yeah, and we have evidence of that, which is great. Deb.
I have a stupid question. Could you explain what RISE is? I wasn't here when that was set up.
It's a program that serves our neediest autistic children. Right now it serves K through 3 students, and the expansion that we are considering or that we want to go forward with is we want to make it K through 6. Part of the reason, some of the more immediate concerns are that we had at least one student that left the district because we couldn't really serve them in that K to 3 program, and they were a little too old. Another, we've had at least one student move from out of state that is not entered into our schools yet, that has pretty severe autism, and we're planning that RISE will probably be the place that student will need to be served. And I always say probably, talking about special ed, because I don't like to say anything concretely until the day we meet as an IEP team and we make those decisions together. But, and in the pre-K, which is, that's where probably we have the most burgeoning autism population. And so those kids are coming. And so we really need to look at ways to build capacity for those students. And, if you start it now, the genesis was last year, and you start improving on it year after year, what eventually will happen is those experts, you would hope, in that program can start to triage in our other schools as consultants. Those, so our schools become more and more capable of maintaining some students with more severe disabilities in a way that is productive for the student and more cost effective even than now for us.
You're right.
Thank you.
Well, seeing the
Mike,
I'm sorry.
Mike.
I just have a quick question.
Sorry.
It's non-budgetary, but I wondered, you mentioned a burgeoning autistic population coming up. Are you noticing an increased frequency or, a larger expanding population in those ways, Paul?
So the population in pre-K is, so Michael, there's 5 students now that in pre-K, I don't know how much I can really say, but there's 5 in pre-K that we would consider meeting that criteria, and that are not just sort of your everyday run-of-the-mill student, So, this year we had 2, so that really might meet the criteria for a RISE program the year prior. So next year we're looking at, when these kids move to kindergarten, we're looking at the RISE program having between 9 and 11 kids versus 6, at current. So, I'm going to say the goal to any program is the kids aren't in the program their whole career, right? We want to foster independence. And I know RISE, I just can't speak highly enough about it and the expertise that we have in it. And I'm really excited because instead of getting a special educator to expand RISE, another special educator, we're getting a speech and language professional, which, if anyone knows anything about autism, you understand the communication component of it. And that in and of itself also can is more efficient than just hiring a special educator, because all these kids in that program need speech and language services anyway. And then to have a speech and language professional attached to that program full time, they can work whole group with kids, they can do individual sessions with kids, they can maintain and teach them how to use their communication devices. So I think that'll work out just far more efficiently than having just a special educator in there.
just thinking, Paul and Randy, since Paul mentioned that, we can show that it is having an impact. It'd be great at some point, to kind of share with the board, some info about, about that impact and how it's, give us a little bit more of a short little blurb on how RISE is doing and how it's making a difference for kids.
I can certainly do that. I can pull together some of the numbers that we've been looking at, and so part of it is thinking about what kids might not be in our schools, right? That's one component that is interesting, and we can talk about that based on just numbers of students. And then also how many students maybe we can bring back from out of district placements, and then the effectiveness of the programming on the students now. I think that's important, and in some way, shape, or form, I'll be able to convey that to you folks.
Just imagining all the boards would probably, find that really useful. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, we got Sue off track, or?
No, this is all good stuff we should be talking about. So my sort of summary on all of our staffing changes that we've been discussing is that the net total is a 1.0 FTE increase when all is said and done with the moving parts, right? It's a lot of moving parts. It's a big budget. There's a lot of different staffing categories. And as you guys have been talking about, these reassignments, adjustments, they're made to best serve the students and to provide our services more efficiently, just like we've been talking about. So bottom line is, even though it's a little complicated, is an increase of 1.0 in this budget as far as staffing goes. Assessments, right? Same story, what we talked about with the BRSU. We've got, we don't have a very big increase in assessed expenditures because along with the savings to assessed expenditures, we have a decrease in revenues, right? So there's a very small change in the overall assessed expenditures, and it's a small decrease. But we have a sizable surplus to talk about returning. And so we're actually going with a really big number here because we have a really big surplus, right? So we ended the year with that 614 that we talked about, and we had set aside 100 for use this year as a return of surplus against this year's assessments. So sort of the balance of that approximately is $500,000. So that's what we've included as a return to surplus. So it is a really big number. But SPED is a really big budget, and we had sizable savings, like I said, not just due to COVID. So again, for the same reasons that we talked about for the BRSU budget, I think it makes sense to be discussing returning that large number back to the taxpayers.
Kind of backtracking a little bit, before, talking about the 500, I guess. A couple of things that sort of struck me when looking at the SPED budget were actually the decreases in a couple of bits. The services non-operating grades.
Yep.
And because that's down by about $500,000.
Yep.
And then looking at then. We've got also, way back on line 133, services tuition down dramatically. Just looking at, I guess the first thing that got me was when we're talking about non-operating grades is it's a significant decrease. You did note that we had, 22 budgeted students exit, 15 come in, decline of 7 on a net basis. But I'm just trying to figure, could we get caught out with that size of a decrease in the non-operating?
Well, if by caught out, do you mean caught off guard and have it go right back up again?
Yeah, or actually have it turn out to we decrease it by $500,000, but then the actual expenditures next year are flat. To
Yeah, I mean, so think about this as the same way you think about your tuition in your local budget.
That's what I am thinking about.
Right. And so do we cushion it, right, with the anticipated students? We've never done that before with special education. And I think one of the reasons to not do it is there is so much fluctuation in and out. Whereas in your local budgets, you tend to see your overall enrollment, even though there are kids going in and out, you tend to see that overall enrollment number increase. I can't say the same for special ed. And on top of that, you wouldn't be actually doing a kid count. You would probably just project a number. Like maybe we say, okay, it's $500,000, and then half of that gets reimbursed, right? So it ends up being $250 that gets rolled into the assessments every year to cushion. Perhaps on a year where we were facing a deficit or we were breaking even and we wanted to make sure we were covered in the future, in the following year. But in this year, we're still anticipating a surplus this year. Again, right. Don't really know if that will materialize, right? Because kids are always coming and going. Right. But when you're talking about, especially some of this handful, this net 7 of kids, we have kids that because of residential placements, it's very expensive, or even kids that aren't in residential placements that are way over the 60,000 mark. So just a handful of kids can produce a really big number. And yeah, that can turn around and happen the same way by having those kids come in, but at least we're going to get the reimbursement for that.
Yeah. No,
so I'd hesitate to throw that kind of stuff into an assessment.
Not thinking about even, padding it. It's more a question of, what got me nervous was this is such an unusual year that when we see the numbers changing dramatically, it's essentially, do we feel comfortable that our assumptions for next year are probably reasonably valid, You know, are there kids that exited the system if you had 22 kids exit the system, if some of those are still in school,
Yeah, I can
some of
say
those are
not.
coming back in because, their parents are elsewhere right now or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, this year we did see an increase in students who are homeschooled. And there are special ed students. We have 11 total homeschool kids in the special ed realm, and none of them, actually one of them, who would be considered a significant cost, I think, above and beyond. And last year we just had a very few, 3 or 4 special ed kids who were homeschooled. So I don't think that's going to throw things off kilter that much, Jim, with the kids that I went through,
Yeah.
and so I think we'll be okay with that.
Yeah, because this is, I'm looking at it. You guys understand the whole picture here. I don't know, and I'm not supposed to know all that much. So it's just, are you I guess it's down to, are you comfortable with those? With that being a reasonable.
Well, I always worry 100% of the time. So no, I'm never comfortable, but
It's nature.
It's the nature of special ed too. Kids come and go, and costs, one day are not nearly the same as they are the next. But I do have a lot of faith in Sue, and I think it'll be okay.
I think all of us do. I'm just thinking of, I thought it made, personally, I looked and I said, putting the 500 in of surplus made a lot of sense, unless something is out there that, that kind of gives us a little bit of cause for concern. Jane?
One of the things I wonder about here, but again, I think it's all speculation and having to wait to see what happens. But I know that with developmental disabilities, home caregivers, parents were paid this year to be providers. So I think potentially one of the things that I wonder if this could be kind of a mediating factor and how much in the future it might play into that, because there really is there is a push right now to have that renewed so that parents and family get paid for tending to children. And I think that I got the sense in talking to some of those parents that if they were paid,
You got to mute
Yourself, Jane.
Jane. You muted.
oh, I'm sorry. I think, hold on.
No,
You're muted. Yeah.
You unmuted for a sec there.
There we go. Sorry. It was my sense that in talking to some of these parents that got paid, and for the first time they felt like financially they could stay at home and care for their children and educate them if they need to do some, stay at home.
Right. There could be like work from home.
That they would hope that there would be a move toward getting paid again. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's through developmental disability services, through whichever the designated agency is. I think that and it will be interesting to see, I agree, Jane, to see what happens over time as people are looking at creative ways to provide services across the board. I think, Jim, I would just make one more comment regarding your question. As you look at this entire budget, you can see the impact of COVID. You can see it on last FY20, you can see it on FY21, and you're seeing it on FY22. We are kind of along for the ride right now and making the most intentional and strategic decisions we can, given the information that we've got. So most of you have been a part of this process to see the reductions that we made last spring, that I kind of talked about in my superintendent report, trying to predict what we might be facing. And as we look at the special ed budget, it is still a moving target. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but I think that the point that Sue made is the most important point to hear is that even with the uncertainty, if we have students whose costs exceed $60,000, which is frankly not that real difficult to get to, then we are reimbursed at 90%. So this is actually an area in which the recommendation that we're making, I think, is as sound as it can be given the circumstances we find ourselves in. And because of that reimbursement that we still have for next year, it provides us a little greater certainty that it's not going to be a misstep that's going to be kind of more catastrophic in nature.
Well, you guys convinced me. I just felt I had to ask the question is all. Okay.
So I don't really have anything else specific to share with you. If anybody is interested in sort of walking through the sections and just sort of talking about what each category supports, or you have any specific questions on the detail, we can certainly hit them.
I want to just add one more piece because, again, for me now, sitting in the seat and thinking more long term, I want to connect some dots for you. This decision to decrease 2 paras and increase a special educator, you have heard that stated many times over the last few years as we are working to implement the recommendations from the District Management Council and meet the expectations through Act 173. So this is just, I want to just be clear and transparent with you that this is one more step that we felt like we could make to continue to move towards putting our most complex learners with skilled, trained professionals to the maximum extent possible.
Nick.
Just because the special ed budget is so mandated on so many different levels, and it's year in and year out, if people show or don't show makes a huge difference. Would it be appropriate at this particular point to accept, adopt, and approve the special ed budget as presented?
Unless there are any other questions, I had one, but I was just kind of curious on one. You had mentioned that that Meadowy, since they had to move from the PK site to operating grades, that impacted their assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious how did you handle that in the assessments? I saw their number went down where everybody else's went up a little bit, but I was just curious how you did that.
So that is, if you look on packet page 30, the very first section is pre-K sites, and that's where that impact is seen. So we haven't reduced any speech personnel, but we have shifted assignments. And as Paul was mentioning, there'll be more speech available to the RISE program. And so that speech position that was formally partially funded under that pre-K sites in the pre-K classroom at Meadowy.
Yeah, there was whole group instruction going on there, which is always good, early intervention. And we had the person available and ready and able to do it last year. But staffing got very tough during COVID, and the geography of the SU got tough, and you have to make decisions. And we decided that we would serve the speech and language that was in each student's IEP.
Right.
That was sort of a luxury. I hate to say it, to have a person to be able to be in the pre-K 3 days a week and working with all the kids, whether they were on IEPs or not. Yes, there was kids on IEPs in there, so that the time was, obviously appropriately applied. But we looked at it as a whole group situation, and that person probably spent more time in there than they absolutely needed to. And that's probably where that number change came from.
Okay. Great.
Then I make the motion that I made a moment ago.
Certainly. You want to state it again?
I move that the BRSU accept, adopt, and approve the budget as presented.
Okay.
Second.
We have a second from David Chandler. Okay, if no further discussion, then, Dean, you can speak up. Everybody else, if you're vote to approve, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, I see all those hands, so I don't think we even need to ask for nays or abstentions. So that's unanimous. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Sue.
Sure.
Great work. And Paul, welcome too, since we should have welcomed you before, but.
Oh, it's okay, Jim. I'll just talk about you guys later. Actually, you seem like an incredibly nice bunch of people, so I'm glad that the SU is under your guidance. So I'm not just sucking up either. It's not my nature.
That could be questioned.
Flattery will get you everywhere, Paul.
Yeah, Randy told me, Paul, before you go there, you better have some compliments ready.
That's
Yeah,
it.
I throw your superintendent under the bus.
No, she's a good
And,
friend.
And, it's nice to have you on board. And as always, when we go through budget process, just kudos to Sue, because that's, as I said, next to everybody else I've seen around, other districts, you just put them to shame. So it's,
She does.
That's very
That's true.
kind.
I've worked in other districts, and that's just the truth. So
Ah.
it's just the truth. So thanks, folks.
all right. So we're doing well on time. The next item we have in here is legislative updates. And I talked to Randy and she said, I said, is that me? And she said, sure. Anyway, I bore you for a couple of minutes just with kind of, this is the David and I on the VSBA board, and I'm being on I get to have a few more meetings than David since I'm on the executive committee. So get a little bit of the inside scoop, and we've been discussing what's going on in Montpelier. Basically, as probably everybody's been saying, the expectation is that there's going to be relatively little time in Montpelier for issues other than COVID-related issues. That's certainly what they're saying, but we're kind of trying to push on a couple of items in the education committees, mostly in the House, but potentially the Senate. We're not sure who's going to lead up at this point. Kate Webb, who has been the chair of House Ed, is going to continue as chair of House Ed. Philip Baruth, who's been chair of the Senate Ed, is apparently not going to be doing it, and we don't know who is going to be doing that. But that, I think, will be settled like tomorrow. We're trying to push on a few things, and to get the legislature to take some action. One is actually on our fun issue of healthcare negotiations, which turned out so well last time. So we're and that actually may get some activity because right now the NEA is pushing on. They're trying to push very hard on a couple of issues that most school boards in the VSBA are not overly excited about. We're trying to push on some issues that, like when you go to arbitration, then they have to consider the financial impact of the decision and actually write in their arbitration decision why they decided what they decided, which was not the case in the last go round. So we're kind of trying to push pretty hard on getting the legislature to consider making a few little tweaks to Act 11 that created the statewide bargaining. Basically, and since there are issues that I think are in the best interests of school boards, and there are issues that are in the best interest of the NEA, we may actually be able to, the last session, the Senate Ed, Baruth, who was heading up Senate Ed, actually said, you guys go and negotiate amongst yourselves and come back to me with something. And that was kind of done with a sort of we could agree on a few things, but it ended up not getting to the point of being legislation. So we may be able to get some activity there. The other likely Act 1, also in the legislature, the weighting study. that pupil weighting study that, looking at changing the weights of each pupils in equalized pupil calculation for taxes. That is a big issue. The report actually came out at the end of 2019, and a lot of people were pushing very hard to get some activity on coming up with an implementation plan for those weights. And there's still a lot of people. I've actually been attending. There's a group that was started by some folks up in Burlington on their school board to try to push on this, and there are a variety of people who want to push on it. The VSBA has taken a position that yes, the weighting study, recommendation should be implemented, but it's very important to come up with a plan that doesn't negatively impact those districts that are going to be financially disadvantaged by implementation of the new weights. For the BRSU, Randy and Sue and all have done the numbers that have come out are not exactly 100% clear or necessarily correct for our districts, but the Joint Fiscal Office came out with numbers that indicated sort of a small impacts for Taconic and Green and Medowee, but unfortunately a much more significant negative impact for Winhall if the new weights were implemented immediately. So we're going to be paying attention to that. There's already been one bill put out there that says, okay, we'll put the new weights in place, but we will limit for the first year how much you can be impacted, for the second year how much you can be impacted, the third year, sort of like the Act 46, giving 8 cents, 6 cents, 4 cents sort of thing. They're trying to come up with a way to ease that. So that the weighting study is something that actually may happen in the legislature. And then one thing that Randy's been extremely involved with, she was helping the special ed organization. There's an organ, the VSCSEA.
VCSEA.
Yeah. Vermont Council on Special Education Administrators.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. This is on Act 173. If you all remember where we've been discussing the changes in special ed. Well, a big part of that is the funding moving to a block grant funding model. And Randy's been involved with, this isn't really in the legislature, it's with the State Board of Education. They're trying to set the rules for how Act 173 will be implemented. And there are a variety of issues. Randy gave me the whole, spiel on this. So there are some real key issues. Right now, luckily, the State Board of Education has a sort of draft set of rules, which are actually pretty good. But there are a variety of other parties who are trying to come in and say that suggest changes that the VSBA, the VCSEA, the Superintendent's Association, Principals Association, all don't think are useful changes. So all those organizations together have put their 2 cents into the legislature and are trying to move to get the Act 173 rules passed as they had been drafted and as the VCSEA and others agreed would be sensible. So that's just something else that's happening out there. So not a lot is likely to happen, but healthcare negotiations hopefully will. The weighting study, I think we all have to, that's going to be very interesting to us once a solution happens because it's going to impact us. And on Act 173, that's just a big issue for our activities going forward. Yeah.
I just want to I mentioned this, I know at least at one other meeting, but I'll mention it with all of you as well, that then the numbers that are included right now for our districts are not accurate because they are using the free and reduced numbers for our 6 BRSU schools to inform the entire SU population or the entire district population. So, for instance, the numbers that represent the Taconic and Green District are taking the free and reduced for the 5 T&G schools, but applying that to all students. So I've been working with the Joint Fiscal Office. They're aware of that error. They don't know quite yet how they're going to fix it, but I want you to know I'm very much on top of it. And part of that entire process will be as things progress, I will be working with the schools that our students attend to make sure that we have the accurate numbers from an independent and public schools that we don't operate, to make sure that the weights that are being given to our students mirror our actual demographics, which they do not right now. So please don't get too caught up right now in what you're seeing, because it's not right. Okay. But I'm on top of it. So keep you posted.
Well, I also asked Sue Zagleski to push on joint fiscal and all as well, to with the backstory of the numbers for us aren't correct. So just curious if they just got, basically, since we have such a large concentration in like Burn and just a couple of schools, if we got those schools right, then would we probably be in pretty good shape?
It would certainly help. Yes. I mean, we could easily pull out, 90% of our kids from a few schools and not have to nickel and dime as much as far as looking at the impact. But I am pretty confident that you are going to want to reap as much as you can if they shift the weighting study so that you're funded at the level that you are entitled to be funded at.
Yeah, because to just put this in context, looking around, the joint fiscal report, said by district what the impact was going to be. And there are a lot of districts around the state who would stand to have the concept is that if you have a decrease in your tax, basically this is supposed to put everybody on equal weighting as far as having the resources to provide those special ed services. In typical fashion, nobody's looking at it that way. Everybody's looking at it, what is this going to do to my budget and my tax rate? Is it going to go down or up? And the down or up with districts around the state is, for a bunch of them, it's very significant. It could be, 20 cents in the tax rate or something like that. So there are a variety of people who are the people who would gain 20 cents are really excited about trying to get this in place. The people who would cost 20 cents are not so excited right now. So coming to a solution. Okay. Well, that's more than I should have said about legislative updates. Now we have a reflection on norms. Other than my little diatribe there, how did we do? Any Deb's gives a thumbs up. Diane?
Yep.
Okay, Corey. So we're kind of, all suggestions for improvement are always welcome. I run meetings kind of in a loose fashion. I'm not sure Herb enjoys that.
I think these meetings are well organized. They're very respectful about giving people a voice. You're very responsive to making sure that there's a format for questions to be asked and answered. I don't think there's anything in that way to fault about. If I have any personal frustrations, it has to do with not having enough time to really look at what I'd like to look at in terms of getting a bigger picture. But I do feel consistently that people are arriving to these meetings with well-organized, prepared plans, and it's very helpful. So thank you for that.
Okay. So but no more thoughts on the norms, then communications with parents, citizens, staff. That includes anybody not on the board. So anybody's welcome to, for people.
Celeste, do we have anybody on YouTube?
We have 2 people watching, but no comments.
Okay. And I'll just ask Herb real quick, you comfy with our where are we coming out on those budgets?
I'm comfy.
Good. Okay. Next meeting date is a long ways off, March 22nd.
Wow.
We've done our work for the time being, so we get some time off. So unless there's any other comments, then I'll look for Dick. A motion.
Adjourn.
I got to ask for it.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand and Dean say yes.